So the standard Morris Minor wiper motor is a bit crap, really. So given that I had to cut out the bracket that holds it in on my car and do a bit of rust repair, I've decided to engineer a replacement using the wiper motor from a K11 Micra. These are easy to get hold of. You can find scrap K11 Micras, that's the 1990s Micra, if you don't know your Nissan chassis numbers. So these are really easy and cheap to get hold of. And it comes with a steel plate which is bolted on with 3 bolts, and it will also have a small wiper arm screwed onto the spindle there. And it does have a plastic plug, so if you can salvage that from the Micra when you get it, that's a bonus, because then you can use that to plug it into the car. But if not, it does just have regular spade terminals inside the plug, so you can plug the Miner's wiring loom directly into it. And because the K11 Micras were all made in Sunderland, the wiper motor is made in England, so it's perfect for those concourse Morris Minor restorations. To mount the motor to the car, I'm going to cut up and remake or rather adapt the original wiper motor bracket. It's quite easy to remove from the car. It's just got 3 spot welds on either side. Drill those out and it'll just pop off. I'm going to use the original Micra mounting plate, and I'm going to make 2 flat surfaces with welded on nuts that I can then screw the mounting plate to using some just normal M8 bolts. And then obviously using the original factory bolts, I can then bolt the wiper motor to its original plate, and it will stick out of the side quite nicely. So to actually convert the wiper motor from the Micra to drive the Minor wiper setup, the first thing was I made this. This is the original wiper arm from the Micra, which I then cut and then welded on a flat piece of steel about the same thickness, because the original wiper motor arm, it goes on and then it goes up at an angle and then it ends in a ball joint, which is no good. So I cut it off and then obviously welded on a little piece there. You could just remake this whole bit, but the hole actually has drive splines in it, you can just about see them there, which fit onto the splines of the wiper motor, and see that's held nicely. And then you've just got a little 13mm nut that goes on top of there. Nice and simple. Then what you need to do is you need to measure the distance between the centre of the drive gear here, centre of this spindle, and the centre of that peg, because that distance is basically very, very important, because it basically sets the sweep range of the wipers. If the distance between that and that is too small, they won't sweep enough, and if it's too big, they'll end up sweeping too far and go off the edge of the glass. So what I've done is I've measured it, and then I've replicated that measurement from the centre of the spindle to that place there, where I've drawn a small pilot hole. This is another crucial part of the setup, and this I had to have made for me by an engineer, but if you've got a lathe and the skills to use it, then you could very easily make this yourself. And what you want to do is basically, it's got an M8 thread at the bottom, and that will slide into the hole here in the wiper arm, in the motor arm rather, once that hole's been widened out, and then there'll be an M8 nut on the bottom there to tighten up and hold that pin in place. There is then a section here which is required to give it enough elevation so that the arm with the brass bush in it that drives the wiper cable has enough room to rotate over the top of the spindle, because this protrudes up a few mil, because it has to, because of the thread on the top for the nut. Then you have this smooth portion here, which has got to be exactly the same diameter as this peg. On my car it was 7.1 mil, but obviously you'll have to probably check that on your setup. because this is the part that runs inside that brass bush there. So this is the part which is actually going to drive the wipers, and then on top there's a little M6 thread just with a little retainer nut to keep this in place. So I've got the wiper motor here all mounted up to its original factory plate, and I've drilled out that pilot hole. I've got my drive peg fitted in there loosely, and if I just offer it up to the car, you can see that just slides in there. A bit hard with one hand, but then that should work. Just have to now make a way of securing the cable and holding all of that spinning mechanism without getting it all rusty and dirty, and protecting it, and also make up a mounting bracket to secure the wiper motor, and it can sit quite happily at that angle and the wiring can go underneath. This is starting to look like it might actually work. So I have here the original gearbox from the wiper assembly on the car, and you can see where the plastic gear would rotate, and then there's a guide here for the cable to move back and forth in, and I'm going to call it the connecting rod because that's what it is. The connecting rod just moves around here, and there's a metal plate that screws down on top of this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut out some sheet steel and remake this area as a flat plate, and then use that to basically recreate an area around here to bolt onto the new wiper motor, and also remake this guide area. So I've made this steel template which I'm going to build my gearbox on, and so what I need to do now is replicate this guide here for the cable end to move back and forth. And the easy thing is it's dead in line with the spindle bush from the original plastic gear, so it'll be very easy to mount the center of the Micra motor spindle, which I've measured out, and it will sit there where those two lines intersect. And what I'm going to do to create the guide is cut two pieces of this thick steel and then weld them in perpendicular to the base plate either side of the line. So I've now welded two bits of steel in here on the base plate as a track for the end of the wiper cable to run in. Now that's about 9mm, 9.5mm apart. What I need to do now is I need to chop this base plate so that it, when bolted to the wiper motor, the peg on the end of the connecting rod sits at just the right height, which is about there. So the back of it needs to step down. I'm going to move on now to reconstructing the wiper motor bracket. This is the original bracket from the car, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to combine it with the K11 mounting plate. What I'm going to do is I'm going to drill out the spot welds that hold this flap on, and then straighten both of those out, and then cut most of the middle portion out so that I end up with two flat segments down each side, to which I'll drill holes through and then weld 4 nuts, and then you'll simply be able to bolt this plate onto it using the 4 original mounting holes, which means that this will be easier to take off, and it also means that I'll keep the original rubber mounts on the corner of that plate, so there will be some damping for the noise and vibration of the motor. So a bit of cutting and welding later. Here's my bracket. So you can see I've got 4 nuts welded in each corner. I had to extend this corner a little bit. So I'm just mocking this up on the car. Got the forward end of the gearbox, well, cable box, whatever, with the cable guide just sitting there on the end of the cable. And I've got the bracket. I'm just going to have to mock that up into position so I can work out where the bracket will need to be welded back onto the car. I've also had to do some adjustments to the metal here with a hammer, just beat it back into shape, well, beat it out of shape rather, to create some clearance here, because the motor, the wiper motor, sticks out further than the back of the bracket the way I've mounted it, so it needs a bit of clearance here to push back in, which means I'm going to have to redo my painting and probably some of these welds here, but that's not a big deal. So I've drilled the 3 basic holes in the gearbox base plate in roughly the right position. If I now offer that up to the car, then it sits about right, but it's just a bit too far clocked to the right, so really it needs to be more like that, so those 2 black lines line up. So I'm going to have to elongate those holes so the base plate can rotate. And also I'm going to have to probably shave down the corners of the base plate there so that it can rotate around without catching on those rubber bushes. I suppose I could also shave the rubber bushes a little bit if needs be. So I've adjusted the holes, I've made a bit of clearance around there, give it a shave. And now, if I put it on, it just about, it's a bit hard to see, but it now lines up the back plate with the cable guide. So if I rotate this bit round, you can see how the whole system will go together. I can't do it with one hand, but, or maybe I can. No, I can't. But you can see how the whole system would work. That spins round on the motor, uses the connecting rod to run the cable, which is now after all bolted together. But before I do that, I need to shave away some metal there to make clearance for the bracket, and then do some painting and welding. Okay, after a couple of days I'm back, and I have now got the bracket for the wiper motor welded securely onto the car, and I made some clearance at the back here so that it all fits nicely and doesn't clear anything, and it's nice and solid. I can move the whole car with that. And say the wiper motor, it's not bolted on properly at the moment, but it sits there very nicely. It sticks out the side and it doesn't interfere with anything, so that's a pretty good fitment. I now need to finalise the sort of alignment of the base plate and get it welded onto the guide for the cable. So that's the bottom half of the base plate made up. What I'm now going to do is put some strengthening in this angle here to stop the top piece bending when it takes the torque of the cable moving back and forth. So I've got the basics here of the sort of wheel box that I'm making to replicate the original. That's really nice and strong now with those two thickness of metal there. It's really, really strong. Now I need to replicate this bit here on the front of the original wheel box. What that does is it allows the end of the cable to slot in from the top, and then that's held steady to stop the sheath moving backwards and forwards. So I'm going to use this little block of metal to try and recreate that, and then that will get welded onto the front of the track on my new wheel box. Okay, so I've finished the little end bit. I've welded on a little plate on the end with a slightly smaller hole so that it can retain the cable properly, and now it fits really nice and snugly. If I can actually get it on. There we go, around that. So now that will hold the actual cable sheath completely solid and allow the actual cable end to move back and forth with the motor. So I can now sort of assemble this again and test it for fit, and then I can work out finishing the wheel box and sort of closing it all up. I think it needs a little bit more fettling, but that now fits together. And there we go, that's the basic system rigged up. So the motor will turn, it will pull this round in a circle, and that connecting rod will then convert that rotational motion, and it will draw the cable back and forth along this track, with the cable sheath being held secure there, and it should make the wipers work. Okay, so a couple of fitment issues I've noticed just from doing the test fit is if you actually bolt this down properly on the spindle, then the connecting rod actually gets stuck in the track and it can't move because it doesn't sit high enough. So actually I need to probably put some washers underneath the bottom of this drive pin here. Another thing is that wired up the way it is, if you wire in the positive to the positive, I think it's because Morris Minors are originally positive earth and this car has been switched to negative earth. So what's happening is that the wires are actually the wrong way round, and what it's doing is it's driving the motor backwards, which isn't really an issue in and of itself. But what it's doing is, because it's driving everything backwards, it's actually making the nuts, the nut here and also the nut on the bottom of this drive pin, it's actually making them undo themselves because that's the motion that's happening. So I think the best thing to do is actually wire the motor backwards, which I'll go into later, and that way the motor will spin the other way, which I think is the way it's probably meant to turn anyway, and that will actually prevent stuff from tightening up. If anything, it will tighten it. So I've made some adjustments to the system. You see, rather than actually adding in washers, I've built up a raised area on the rotating arm with just some extra bits of metal and drilled through, and that's got the connecting rod to sit at pretty much the right height, and I also ground down the back of the guide a bit just to give it a bit more clearance. And I've given the system a basic test and it actually works quite well. It goes round, it moves the wipers back and forth. I'll do a proper test on video later when it's all sort of sorted, but a couple of problems I noticed. This area bends quite significantly when it's going backwards and forwards, and within no time at all that will fatigue and snap. So obviously I need to finish actually building the wheel box and add in some extra strengthening down here, which shouldn't be a problem. The other thing is that the wiring is a bit different to what the Morris Minor wiring system uses, because this is a 5-wire motor, whereas the original one is just on and off. So I'm going to have to play a bit potentially with the wiring on the car, but definitely going to have to work out which terminals on this on the motor do which. Okay, I'm now in the car and I think I've got this wiper wiring situation sorted. I've removed the plastic connector from the wiper motor. It's quite easy, it just pops off. And you've got 5 terminals. You've got these 2. Your red wire is your low speed, your blue wire is your high speed. This terminal here with the black wire going to it, that's earth. And then these 2, I believe, are for the self-park circuit, but we can't really use that, I don't think, because we're going to have to wire the motor backwards to get it to work properly, to get it to go in the right direction. I might look into that later, but for now I just want to get it working. Now I've also brought through from the engine bay the wiring, the part of the wiring loom that deals with the wiper motor, and it includes on it this little earth wire which connects to just the body of the fuel pump to provide an earth, and I've actually removed that because it's not needed anymore. What I've now got here is this wire, which is for the fuel pump, so we'll leave that alone, and then you've got a green wire and a green and black wire. Now the green wire, when the key is switched on, that's live all the time. The green and black wire, that's your earth. That goes from the wiper motor back to the switch on the dashboard, and when you flick the switch on, it then provides a circuit to ground, and then that allows the wiper motor to complete the circuit and turn on. So you're not actually switching the power on when you turn the wiper motor on, you're switching the earth on. So if you've got your original dunk-dunk 2-position switch and you want to keep it that way, just have an on-off, then you've got to choose which speed you want to use, either high or low, and then you would simply plug your green power into the earth terminal on there, and then you would run the green and black wire into either of these, and that would then complete the circuit when you switch the switch on and turns the motor on and off. It's nice and simple. However, if you want to use both the speeds it's capable of, you're not going to need a different switch. This is a Lucas 3-position switch, so it's off, on, and then on again. Now this is different to the light switch, which is also 3-position. So you're going to need one of these. I'll put the part number of this switch up on the screen so you can buy it. There's also another one which has an extra pole if you prefer to use that one, which I think is a little easier to find, so I'll put the part number for that one up as well. But I'm going to be using the first one since it actually came with the car. So to make it work with 2 speeds, you're going to wire this terminal here, which is number 4. That's going to go to earth, so it's going to go from the switch to earth somewhere on the car's body, nice and easy. Then this one, terminal number 6, you're going to run that to the low speed wire on the motor. That's the red one. Terminal number 8, which is this one, you're going to run to the high speed wire on the motor, which is the blue one. And then you're, as before, you're going to connect your green wire here, the power feed, into the earth terminal. And then that way this will switch the earths on and off correctly to allow you to get both speeds. So that would be wipers off, low speed, high speed. So yeah, that's how you wire it. I'll put it all together and show you it working. Now there isn't enough wires to do that. You can use the green and black wire to run one of the speeds, but to get both of them to work you're going to have to run another wire into the car to the switch. So I'm going to make a blue wire to connect the high speed circuit, because that's also blue, and that will run into the switch. Okay, so the motor's all plugged in, ready to test. So I'll just jump inside the car again. So, we have our switch all wired up. A bit hard to see, but yeah. And then there is a earth, obviously, that goes to the original wiper switch, which you can reuse. So then, ignition off, and the switch does nothing. Then ignition on, and then we have low speed, and then high speed. Fantastic. Okay, so I've skipped ahead a little bit in the project, and I've finished fabricating the new wheel box. So you see it's now all got sides and it's all closed in. We've got a bit of nuts around it to fix the lid on, and that's now really, really nice and strong. There's no way that could possibly bend under the force of the cable going back and forth. It is quite heavy being made out of steel rather than the original aluminium one, but it should be alright. And then we've got a lid again which sits on top and bolts in place with some just regular M8 bolts. So nice and easy to work on, get the lid off. So that should actually be now more or less finished. So what I'm going to do is degrease these two parts and then paint them with red primer. Okay, I've put the gearbox in the car, it's nicely bolted on, motor's plugged in, and I've greased up the runners for the cable to move back and forth in, and I've also put some grease on the turning pins. All I have to do now is slot in the connecting rod, like so, give it a bit of a tap to get home, there we are, and then there's a little nut goes on top of there to keep that steady, and the cable is retained in a little slot there at the end. Good. Now I can actually give this thing a test. Okay, here we go. I've got a battery charger plugged into the battery to provide a bit of extra current to drive the motor. Now, so inside the car, I've wetted the screen a bit with some water to give the wipers something to wipe. So let's put the key in, on, and here goes nothing. Yes! Look at that! They work, and the sweep is pretty much perfect. I think perhaps that wiper could use some adjustment, although the screen is getting a bit dry, so I just use my washers to pump a bit more fluid onto the screen. There we go. And then we've got fast, very fast. And then back on again. Well, I'd consider that a success. Let's have a look at it from the engine bay's perspective. See, there it goes. Turns it round and then runs the cable back and forth inside a little guide there, and I think one of the wipers is scraping a little bit on the bonnet, which is what that noise is, so just get that turned off. Oh. As a famous Kazakhstani ambassador once said, great success. So from this point forward, all I need to do really is tidy this all up and wrap up the mod and get it permanently installed. So I need to install the lid properly on this. Then I'm going to paint the outside of the gearbox with some black paint to make it look a bit less sudden. And then also I need to remove the motor and the motor mounting bracket and paint all this bare metal area from when the bracket was installed. And basically, yeah, tidy it up, do a final installation, and that'll be that. Okay, so installation's finished. Got the gearbox all nicely bolted on. The bolts are a bit long for it, but they're the only ones I had, so in the future I can probably replace those with some short ones, or maybe just cut these ones down. But that's all nicely sealed in. Cable sheave is held completely tight, so that's great. I've also wrapped this little wiring loom here with some fabric tape to tidy up a bit. Fuel pump wire there, and it's all nicely tucked away underneath. So yeah, I've given it a few further tests and it all works pretty well, so I'd consider that job done. Well, that just about wraps it up for this video, which is already way too long, but I wanted to make it a bit longer to get in enough detail about the installation of the whole sort of system, so if anyone else wanted to replicate what I've done, then they'd sort of have a bit of an instruction on how to do it. But yeah, it all seems to be working well, and yeah, it should hopefully hold up in the future. I guess time will tell. So next video, I think I'm going to be moving on to getting the Marina pedal box installed, which is going to be a bit of a job. So I hope you'll all join me then, and see you in the next video. I'm not really that good at goodbyes, so